And we are back with part 3 of this week's Shabbat services for November 7th, 2020, or Chesspan 205781. And we're going to continue with recapping of the Torah. We had just talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we have Abraham and Gerar. So once again, Abraham claims Sarah as his sister so he wouldn't be killed. But God shut up the womb of every woman in Abimelech's kingdom, so there was no birth happening because of Sarah. And God actually came to Abimelech in a dream and basically let Abimelech know that Sarah was the married woman, and he kept him from sinning against God. And then Abimelech confronted Abraham, and he did do the right thing and sent Sarah back to Abraham, but not before confronting Abraham. Abraham defended his choice, saying there's no fear of God in Abimelech's land, and he also explained that she is a blood relative, and it's only a lie of omission to call her his sister. They had the same father, but not the same mothers. Abimelech gives Abraham money, flocks, and servants to make up for his taking his wife, telling Abraham he may settle anywhere in Gerar that he likes. So Abraham prays to God and lifts the plague that had affected Abimelech's people. So then we have the tale of two sons. Is Isaac and Ishmael. And Isaac was born, and of course he was circumcised, as is the custom, 8 days old, just as God commanded Abraham. And as he grows, Sarah is very concerned about the influence Ishmael might have on him. And actually, Ishmael is kind of abusive to Isaac. So Sarah says to Abraham that Ishmael and Hagar have to go. So it was very distressing at first to Abraham, and God told Abraham that he needs to listen to what Sarah is saying for him to do. It is the right move, that he will make Ishmael great as well. But Isaac is his choice for which the seed was going to go through, and which he was going to become a great nation through. Now Hagar wanders in the desert. She's concerned they run out of water. She does not want to see her son die. She casts the youth under a shrub and sits at a distance weeping. And God did send an angel to reassure her that everything would be all right and shows her actually where to find water. Ishmael grows up in the desert. He flourishes, and his mother finds him an Egyptian wife. So then Abraham also made a treaty with Abimelech, and also where in actually the grievance that he had was with Abimelech's servants in the wells. So that actually Abraham told Abimelech, about the wells and that they were stuffing up the wells, and Abimelech said he didn't know anything about that, but they actually made a covenant together. So Abraham plants a tree and calls out to God. Um, and the Hebrew name by which he refers to God is El Olam. Olam means world, but also comes from the same root, Ne Elam, meaning hidden. Abraham remains in Gerar a long time. And lastly, we have the binding of Isaac. After all that's happened, God chooses to test Abraham, and he tells him to take his only beloved son, Isaac, and give him up for an offering. And after 3 days of traveling, Abraham tells his servants to stay with the donkey, and he continues on with Isaac. And along the way, the two talk, and Isaac asks where the lamb was for the offering. Abraham assured his son that God would show them the lamb, and I'm sure Abraham was very nervous about this because it's, but he showed faith. So he prepared the wood and binded his son, placing him on top of the wood, and he had rose his hand to slaughter Isaac when the angel called out for him to stop. That God knew that Abraham would not withhold anything from him. So Abraham then spied a ram caught in a thicket and offered it in place of his son. And the angel called out again from heaven, telling Abraham that on account of his actions, his blessings would grow and his descendants would inherit the land. The nations of the world will be blessed because Abraham's descendants as well. And actually, this is such a great type and shadow of Yeshua. God did not withhold his only begotten Son from us. Yeshua gave his life for us. He actually did give his life for us to redeem us. And I also want to mention, the faith that Abraham had that God would provide, Jehovah Jireh, and he, he was steadfast and actually had faith that God would provide. And when he said that to Isaac, and Isaac was trusting as well, to actually trust his father who was about to slay him. Very interesting section, but again, very much a type and shadow of Yeshua. So Abraham returned to Beersheba with his servants then, and after a time, news actually came to Abraham that Abraham still had a surviving brother, Nahor, Nahor, and Nahor had children, and one of his children's name was Bethuel, and he was the father of Rebekah. Now that's a spoiler alert. Rebekah does become the wife of Isaac. So that's the end of the Torah portion. And the recapping of the Torah portion, we're going to get into the Haftorah now. And the Haftorah this week is 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 to 37. The miracle of multiplying oil. Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, Your servant, my husband, is dead. You know that your servant feared Adonai. Now the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. What should I do for you? Elisha asked. Tell me what you have in the house. She replied, Your handmaid has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. Then he said, Go borrow for yourself vessels from all your neighbors, empty jars, not just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and behind your sons, and pour into all those vessels, setting aside what is full. So she left them and shut the door behind her and behind her sons. They kept bringing the vessels to her, and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, Bring me another vessel. But he said to her, There isn't another vessel, so the oil stopped. Then she came and told the man of God. So he said, Go sell the oil and pay your debt. Then you and your sons can live on the rest. And the next segment is Shunammite hospitality. One day when Elisha passed through Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, he persuaded him to eat some food, and so it was, whenever he passed through, he would stop for a meal. Then she said to her husband, Behold, now I realize that this man who often passes through is a holy man of God. Please, let's make a little walled room on the roof, and let's put there a bed, a table, a chair, and a lampstand for him. Then whenever he comes to us, he can stay there. One day he came there and retired to the upper chamber and lay down. Then he said to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunammite woman. When he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, Tell her, behold, you have gone to all this trouble for us.
What can be done for you? Can something be communicated to the king or to the commander of the army for you?" She answered, "I am living among my own people." So he asked, "Then what should be done for her?" Then Gehazi answered, "In fact, she has no son and her husband is old." "Call her," he said. And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, "At this season next year you will be embracing a son." But she said, "No, my lord, do not lie to your handmaid, man of God." Nevertheless, the woman conceived and bore a son during that season, the following year, just as Elisha had told her. Now when the child was grown, one day he went out to his father among the reapers. Then he said to his father, "My head, my head." So he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." So he picked him up and brought him to his mother. The child sat on her lap until noon and then died. She then went up and laid him on the bed, and the man of God on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door on him and went out. Then she called it to her husband and said, "Please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and come back." But he said, "Why are you going to him today? It is neither new moon nor Shabbat." But she said, "It will be well." Then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Move on, don't slow down riding unless I tell you." So she set out and came near the man of God at Mount Carmel. Upon seeing her from a distance, the man of God said to his servant, "Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and ask her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the boy?'" She answered, "It is well." But when she arrived at the mountain up to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet. Now Gehazi stepped forward to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone, for her soul is bitter within her. Yet Adonai has hid it from me and has not told me." "Did I ask my lord for a son?" she said. "Didn't I say, 'Don't deceive me'?" Then he said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, don't greet him. Or if anyone greets you, don't answer him, and lay my staff on the face of the child." But the mother of the child said, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So he arose and followed her. Gehazi passed on ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him, "The boy has not awakened." When Elisha entered the house, there was the child dead and lying on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind the two of them and prayed to Adonai. Then he got up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself upon him, so that the flesh of the child became warm. Then he stepped down and walked in the house to and fro, and then he got up on the bed and stretched himself on him. The child sneezed 7 times. Then the child opened his eyes. He then called Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite." So he called her. When she came in to him, he said, "Pick up your son." She came, fell at his feet, and bowed down to the ground. Then she picked up her son and went out. Now, this is the end of the Haftarah reading. Now, there's the common thread between the Torah portion and the Haftarah portion is both of these couples that were mentioned um, in the Shunammite couple and Abraham and Sarah were barren, and they were told, "Next year at this time you will have a child, you will have a son." And neither of them are directly asking for a son prior to receiving the prophecy, and they both kind of responded similarly. Sarah laughed. The Shunammite woman didn't laugh. She said, "Don't lie for me to me. Don't deceive me, man of God." But they kind of did respond similarly. The Shunammite woman actually had faith in God. She actually verbalized it as well, even though it wasn't, um, because the son was lying dead in the bed back at her house. Now I'm gonna further recap really quickly. Um, before we pause this and end this section of Shabbat service. So we look at VaYera, Parashat VaYera, in Genesis. God did reveal himself to Abraham 3 days after the the whole nation actually circumcised. The males were circumcised, and at this point, Abraham was 99 years old. So Abraham rushed off to make sure that there was a meal prepared for these three guests that appeared. Um, these are angels disguised as men that appeared to him, and they he, they were told exactly 1 year that Sarah would give birth to a son, and Sarah laughed. And Abraham pled with God also to spare the city of Sodom. There's quite a few stories in here in this section. And two of the three disguised angels arrive in the doomed city, where Abraham's nephew Lot extended hospitality to them. Um, Lot was living there, and Lot actually protected them from the Sodomite mob who wanted to have relations with them. And the two guests revealed that they came to destroy the city, and that Lot needed to flee with his family. Lot did flee with his wife and two daughters, and the wife turned into a pillar of salt when she did not obey the command not to turn around and look back at the burning city, that they were supposed to just keep their eyes focused ahead and move on and not turn back and look. So while taking shelter in a cave, Lot's two daughters believed that their father and them were the only ones left in the world, and so they got their father drunk to keep his seed going on and to repopulate. Both of them on separate nights lied down with their father and became pregnant with Moab and Ammon. Abraham moved to Gerar, and again for a second time, Abimelech actually took Sarah because Abraham presented Sarah as his sister, and God sensed the dream and warns Abimelech that he will die unless he returns this woman to her husband, that she is married. Abraham explained that he feared that he would be killed over Sarah. Um, so God remembers his promise to Sarah, gives her and Abraham a son, Isaac. In Hebrew, it's Yitzhak, and it means will laugh. Isaac is circumcised at 8 days old. Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90 when Isaac is born. And Hagar and Ishmael, they are banished from Abraham's home, and they end up wandering in the desert. They are banished because Ishmael was being abusive to Isaac, and Sarah didn't like that, and she decided that they had to go because he would not be joint heirs with her son, hers and Abraham's son. But they're wandering in the desert. They run out of water. Um, Hagar is crying out, and God did hear the cry and saves his life by showing Hagar a well where they had water. So Abraham then makes a treaty with Abimelech, and this is a sign of their truce, and also that the wells were addressed at that point as well. And then we have Abraham's devotion to God, that he did not hold back Isaac. And then as we ended the last chapter in this parashat, we learn of Rebekah, son of Bethuel, who's the son of Abraham's brother Nahor. And as we move forward, we're going to learn more about that because Rebekah does become Abraham's wife. So in the Haftorah, we are also looking at, as I had mentioned, the similarities that God had promised a child to Abraham and Sarah. And here in 2 Kings chapter 4, a child is promised to the Shunammite couple as well. And the Haftorah discusses the two miracles performed by Elisha. First miracle involved a widow who was heavy in debt, and her creditors were threatening to take her two sons as slaves to satisfy the debt. So when the prophet asked her what she had in her home, she said nothing but a vial of oil. And Elisha told her to gather as many containers as possible, borrowing from neighbors and friends as well, and she should pour oil from her vial into the empty containers. And she did it, and miraculously the oil continued to flow until the last empty jug was filled. So she sold the oil for a handsome profit and had enough money to repay her debts and live comfortably. And the second miracle was with the Shunammite couple. The Shunammite woman told her husband that they should make a special addition to their home to accommodate Elisha when he came to town. So they did. They put Elisha up. They fed him. They blessed him. And when the prophet learned that the couple was childless, he blessed the woman, saying she would have a child within a year's time, and that did happen. And a few years later, this same son complained of a headache, and he died shortly after. And the Shunammite woman laid the lifeless body on the bed of Elisha's designated room and quickly summoned the prophet. And Elisha hurried to the woman's home and miraculously brought the boy back to life. So that is the end of this segment of Shabbat service. I'm going to close this in prayer, and then we're going to take a short break and come back with the Brit Kadashah. We will then go into an altar call, and after the altar call, we will do Holy Communion and then the Aaronic blessing. Father God, we thank you. We thank you for the powerful lesson in your word and the blessings that you bestowed upon people, um, and the blessings were very miraculous. And what doesn't normally happen happened, and it was through faith. Also, that blessings were also achieved. The return to life of the son of the Shunammite woman. She believed and had faith that that would happen. She believed in the man that the man of God, through God, would be able to bring her son back to life, and it was so. Abraham had faith that you would provide, that you were the provider, and you would provide the ram for, well, actually the lamb he was looking for this sacrifice, and save him from taking out his son. But he did not withhold his son. We know that you didn't withhold yours. Yeshua laid down his life for us so that we may have life eternal. We thank you, Yeshua, for that. We thank you for all that you have done. In the mighty name of Yeshua, Jesus, Amen and Amen. And take a break and come back, and we'll be coming back with the next segment of Shabbat.